Hello and welcome to The Art of Growth. This is Jim Zartman, and today Joel Hubbard and I get to introduce you to a couple amazing people. Today we are talking to Chris and Greg from Personality Path. I think these guys are very important voices in the Enneagram world. Their online test at personalitypath.com is found on the front page of Google for Enneagram tests, and around 100,000 people a month take their tests. And they also provide content for people to grow in their type once they have learned their type and want to use it as a launch pad to grow from. And if you know about Personality Path and you're new to us, welcome to The Art of Growth. You can find out more about us at theartofgrowth.org because we do something very different than these guys, including this podcast. And we do a lot of corporate training, helping companies improve their communication, their conflict resolution, and build a culture of trust using the Enneagram as a foundation. But we are thrilled to introduce you to these guys and hope you enjoy this conversation where we get to know them better and what they're all about. I think there's some great learnings in this conversation about the why we all do things and a call to return to and focus on what really matters. So let's jump into this conversation with Greg and Chris from Personality Path.
All right. Well, we are so excited to be here with Personality Path. And so this is fun. We get a chance to talk about all sorts of things and see where the conversation takes us. But in particular, we sort of ran into each other and found that there was a connection, something that felt aligned between us in terms of, I think, of our perspective of the Enneagram and also our perspective of making it practical for businesses, which is always to me the balance that's tough to strike, which is accessibility, but excellent content. Like, you want both, and you can find some that are really good at the content and others who are good at the accessibility, but to make it both practical and at the same time have depth to it. So that's where I think we started to be able to align around that. So I'm curious. Let's talk about our first encounter, how we met.
Yeah, we have to say it is amazing that we ran into each other because we are from two different continents. We're from Germany, and we ran into you in San Francisco at the Enneagram conference at the IEA International Conference. I met Claudia Nario first, who was also on this podcast already, who held her wonderful workshop. She basically said the next day, I met these other guys and they are also awesome. And we're going to have lunch and you should come and meet those two because I think you would get along as well. And we did. So I was there with you guys. Greg, actually, he had a different lunch appointment that day. So he missed out on that amazing sushi and ice cream we had. And I was just like, the conversations we had at that lunch were just, it was pretty clear that we were thinking along very similar lines when it comes to the Enneagram. The way I would say it is realizing that a lot of the language that has arisen around it is, from my perspective, it's a little bit not the way our generation speaks anymore. And that was the big goal that we had with Personality Path, is to make it accessible to our generation. And I find that we had some very similar things. There's a similar perspective on focusing more on the psychological aspects of it, trying to figure out what parts of the Enneagram are actually helpful, are actually relevant to day-to-day life, to the actual growth process.
I think for my impression was when we first were talking, there was a lot of sort of like testing, right? You're throwing out an idea, you're throwing out a concept. And I could see that there was like oh yeah, you too. Oh yeah, me too. And it did have a lot to do with this. We love the Enneagram, we love the tool. But if it doesn't have practical application to really impact lives at every level, to impact business, to impact your relationships at home, then I'm not sure of its usefulness. If it's become some sort of like personal, feels good, I'm understanding myself a little bit better, that's great. But it really has to move to that next level of impact and change and, something that moves us forward. So I thought, yep, you guys are doing that. And so that was really, really awesome. And there was just a sort of a syncing up. It felt like, oh yeah, we're tracking. we've gone through similar stages and similar awarenesses and discoveries. So that was my impression. But
Yeah, which to be honest was kind of a relief at that conference because I don't know, Greg and I, we shared that experiences like, okay, a lot of these talks and workshops, we didn't have that feeling. We didn't have that feeling of like syncing up, of being aligned in the way we think about it, stuff like that. So we were actively looking for people who were thinking similarly to us.
Yeah, and we did meet some other people there that either have been on or who will be on that were just kind of interested, because one of our issues with so much of the Enneagram world, it is overly siloed. So, people go through certification, they have their ideas, but then they basically have to have their own like little businesses, or they find a niche, but there's not enough like overlap. And as you know, in working with even one other partner, content is radically improved when you have other voices to bounce things off of, when you're in the process of working with someone else, which is why I like that, you guys met and came together and knew each other. So this is what we would love to, talk about a little bit with you, which is, who are you? What is it you're doing, and why is it you're doing it?
Yeah, great question. So we met actually not in San Francisco. We only met then here over Zoom last time, and I think it clicked on so many levels. But maybe a little bit of background about us and why we started Personality Path. I'm Greg. I studied the Enneagram with Andreas Ebert, who happens to be one of the authors of the super famous Enneagram book. He authored with Richard Rohr. Many people might be familiar with that. And so he popularized the Enneagram in the 80s here in Europe, but obviously also in the States. And my journey started actually with reading that book. That was my first starting point into the Enneagram. And this book is a little dated. And I bumped into Andreas just by coincidence when I was like 8 years ago, when I was reading that book. He's also lived in Munich. He passed away last year. And he became one of my big mentors and also I would say counselors, and helped me navigate through some life decisions, to some career decisions as well. So I've been working in a lot with startups, with a lot in consulting, but I always had the feeling I want to go down a different route. And sometimes you have to connect the dots in your life. So I did that during COVID. I think that was the time also for a lot of people. And my old job was coming to an end. And I had the feeling that there is a need out there to bring the Enneagram to a mainstream audience in a really fun, accessible way, but that doesn't take away the depth of the tool, because so many things that I at least found back like 3-4 years ago online was that it made the Enneagram more of a Harry Potter Quizlet, like which character are you most like, and that doesn't do justice to the Enneagram. And I saw when I was teaching the Enneagram together with Andreas here in Germany, there were so many people who were really transformed by this tool, and so that has always stuck with me, that I wanted to do justice to the tool and really bring the depth, but also make it accessible in a fun and entertaining way. And that's what we try to do with Personality Path. That's why we've also chosen the name Path, because I think it symbolizes also the way we see it works with working with the Enneagram. It's not just a one-off thing. You realize you're this type or that type, but to really reap the benefits of the tool, I think it's a lifelong path, and it's always worth taking a look into the mirror and discovering new things. At least that's how it is for me. Even though I know this tool now for 8 years and have been working with it, there's still so many things for me to discover, and so it never gets old. It's just an amazing journey that we're on, and it's so much fun to be able to help a lot of people. So we've started an Enneagram test because that's for many people that's the starting point, and I think we did a good job with that. So we have more than 1.5 million people that already have taken our test and basically gotten a introduction or their starting point with the Enneagram. That's our journey so far.
And Greg and I know each other for much longer than this company. We have known each other for 12. Met in our early 20s.
Anniversary, Christian. Wow.
I don't know. It's been a long time. I've lost track. We met back in when we both went to church. That's where we first played in a band together. And then when Greg had this idea of like, we need to take the Enneagram and basically we need to merge two things. On the one hand, there's amazing content of the Enneagram on the internet. And the people of our generation, when they hear about the Enneagram, they go on the internet. That's mostly what they do. And they search for a test and that's how they get introduced to it. But the great content, they won't find that. That's not on page 1 of Google. And you don't go further than that. So then there is stuff on page 1 of Google, but that's not really great content. That's just a couple sites that figured out how to do the test and how to do SEO, but they weren't taking people on that path. And they were basically just doing this. Just here's your test and here's your type. And then they let you go. And you were basically left to your own devices. If you didn't have a coach, if you didn't know anything more about the Enneagram, you were kind of just lost there. And so we said, what we want to do is merge these two things. We want to be on page 1 of Google, so as many people as possible find us. And the stuff we want to give them is the stuff that actually helps them and that is practical and that helps them understand the Enneagram in a language that they understand, that they speak. And the great luck that we had is that it turned out that we are kind of a good combination because Greg basically brought the whole business acumen, knowledge, savvy part of it into it. And I brought the writer side to it, which was where I'm coming from. Been basically writing my whole life and had been introduced to the Enneagram, I think also like 5 years ago. Also through that Andreas Ebert's link, basically, because he was living in Munich and we're both from Munich as well. And then when Greg came up to me, I was in the perfect position job-wise when he said, well, I have this idea. Do you have a couple of days a week to help me write 20,000 words per type? Wow. I was like, I can do that. Let me figure out how it works. And then I did that and read a lot of books and listened to a lot of people and talked to a lot of people. And then we basically took this thing and it worked. We managed to get on page 1 of Google. That's why we have so many people taking our test every month. I think it's around 100,000 people every month that are on our site. So basically that is the whole idea behind what we're doing. And we're very happy that it's working.
Yeah, I love that you've been able to do that and contextualize it for a culture with quality content. Like that is a hugely important thing, and to have that level of accessibility to it. Where do you see this going? How are you hoping to affect culture, the Enneagram, with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think a great question. And I think that's also where I see so much overlap with you guys, because I think the Enneagram really, you benefit from it once you bring it into certain settings. And I think that's always if you just use it for yourself, I mean, I think that's always a great starting point. But, in your relationship, I mean, for me and my wife, for example, this was, I think, the major game changer. But also in a work setting, what you guys are doing, that's where I see so much potential. And I mean, the Enneagram is just not really used or popularized in that space. There's a bunch of other tools out there that are also great, but I think the Enneagram is just starting out to really be used in certain spaces. And what I see for the next stage of the Enneagram is that there will be more and more people focusing on special niche areas so that you really reap the benefits of the tool, like, coaching a couple in their specific type combination, but also for you in your career development or in your development as a leader, understanding other people. So I think those are the big areas where the Enneagram will definitely have an impact for the next coming years. And that's why we also, love what you guys are doing and cheer on everyone who is actually bringing the Enneagram in a profound way to more and more people.
Yeah.
And really thankful for all the people that we meet throughout the journey, like you guys. And I'm just curious from your side. So I mean, you've also been working with the Enneagram for some time now, but when was the point that it clicked for you that you said, okay, I'm just not gonna use it for my little thingy, but I'm really bringing this to the professional world. I mean, it must have been a really big step for you guys, and would really love to hear your story, but also your motivation behind that.
Yeah. The funny thing about the path is it's so, that's the name you have, is the path. You can look back and make logical sense of it, but you can't look forward and make any sense of where it's going, because any well laid out plan ends up backfiring or just falling apart, or life just, it's like Mike Tyson says, if everybody's got a plan till they get hit in the face, it's like, you're not going to get there quite in the straight path, so we had vision, we had ideas. I could see the Enneagram being used in all sorts of places. For me, I started out with running into it during a tough season of burnout. And it was then that I started reading. And so the name Ebert, I don't know how it's
Ebert, yeah.
Ebert.
Ebert.
That was one of the books that actually opened. It was the only book that opened my eyes to the 7 in me. All the other books kind of failed that for me anyways, because they were too stereotypal. And when I read what was going on there and how Richard Rohr and Andreas were talking about the 7, it was, that is definitely me. And that began my journey to awakening to the 7 and how it functions inside of me. And that led me to then saying, I think there was a sort of a draw to it. So I just sort of followed that draw, said, okay, I think I'm supposed to get certified. Don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I think I'm going to get certified and I'll start there. And my wife was hugely supportive of that. So I went and did my certification. And again, it's like one thing leads to the next. It's okay. While I'm in certification, I'm hearing people talk about coaching and coaching businesses with the Enneagram. And I'm like, that's interesting. So I start getting a little bit interested in that. But that was what I think started the path for me of seeing how this tool can be used in anywhere and everywhere, and should be used everywhere. But then it's, how do you do that? What's opening up, as an opportunity for us. And so it started, opportunity really came knocking on our door when we started a podcast, never imagining anything would happen. And, we start getting thousands of downloads, and in a matter of weeks, and say, okay, what does this mean? So we started coaching, and it was sort of a side hustle, coaching and seeing where that would take us. But the vision around the Enneagram, I share that with both of you, that, it's got to get out there to all these different places and become more niche and become where people are using it through their expertise. They might have been, working with children, and that's their specialty. They might, that's where it becomes like they can start to see how the Enneagram can be applied in that domain. And I would love to see that. You begin your journey looking at the Enneagram, I think, and then eventually you look through the Enneagram and you can see how it applies to your particular area.
Definitely. Just a thought that I had. I was just in a meeting with an old friend of mine that I haven't met for several years, and he was telling me that he has this opportunity of working with like the government and refugees, of like helping refugees getting jobs. So in Germany, as you might know, like people are coming steadily, and so this is a big challenge. And they're thinking of rolling out or using certain personality testing assessment tools to get a better understanding and helping them advise or coach actual refugees in adjusting to society, but also finding their place. And he was also like, wow, the Enneagram is such an amazing tool. I've never thought about using it in such a context. And so I think that's my hope, at least for for the future, that more and more things like that will pop up. I mean, you both will know, of course, also like the Enneagram Prism Project. Those, I think, are all like small niches where people are using it. And obviously, I think the business world is maybe not such a niche, but it's still something that where it's not used that much. I think that the journey the Enneagram is taking right now is just so exciting, and I'm really happy to be part of that journey together with you guys. Another question that I had, because I think for me and Christian, in our type combination, I think it was a match made in heaven. But for you guys, how was your journey of starting this company, starting this coaching business in your type combination? What were your challenges? What did you learn along the way?
Well, it's interesting because I think I'm reflecting on this because I'm coming up on having lived here for 8 years now. And I remember, I don't even know if I've told this story on the podcast, that, we were initially working with this church together, and the first time that we met in person and we were here, and I just said, Joel, I don't know what it is. We're hitting this like tether ball, if you know what that is, like the stick of the ball goes around and we're hitting it back and forth. I was like, I feel like we have something to say together to a much larger audience. He goes, yeah, I do too. I don't know what that is. And this is a couple years before we got into the Enneagram, as far as, anywhere close to what we're doing with it now. And then it expanded from there, but it was always just very easy. So it's always been a very easy thing for us. There's like a shorthand. We make decisions quickly. Neither one of us are easily offended by the other. If someone has an idea that's better, then we're just like, cool. So I think that was really great, because there is combinations that I think that, not just type combinations, but even, your own journey and like honoring the rest of your journey, because we aren't just our types, right? And this is something we're always trying to explain to people. You are not a particular type. And one of the issues in the Enneagram is people over-identify with their type instead of including it in part of the mix of who you are and where you're going. And so, I would say like Joel's from my perspective, he's just always been really easy for me to work with.
Yeah. I would say the same. Before I hired him, I checked out his references, and it was all positive except for one comment that was fairly consistent. And it was like, oh, he's this type of person. I don't know if you care, but if you mind me saying it, Jim, and I'm like,
I don't even know what this is, so I'm curious.
Yeah. I'm also curious now.
The feedback was like, he can be a little bit arrogant. And I was like, okay, we'll see what that, but I was confused by that, because my interaction so far with him was like, no, I don't find him to be arrogant. I find it easy, And so, ever since then, it's been the same thing. It's like, I think it's not a matter of if you are or aren't. It's oftentimes how people experience you. There's that too. And all of it belongs, all of it is part of your own journey, is looking at that. But for us, it's generally been very easy and compatible. I think, again, we're not just, as Jim said, it's not just the type pairing, but also, where you are in your own awakening, your own awareness of things, of life. So that was also real easy.
And it's interesting when people give feedback about someone that way, and then someone else experiences them completely differently. Yeah. This is where I think the Enneagram really does help, because we all have a perspective on reality. And I think I wouldn't have known how to name it until actually in working with one of these companies, someone who was an 8 spelled it out perfectly, how people perceived him as arrogant, because what they said was, you're really teachable, but you're not highly approachable. Mm-hmm. And there was something about that phrase that goes, oh, so there's a filtering mechanism that takes place. And this is something I'd love to bounce off with all of you, because you were talking about these niches that people work in the Enneagram, and how people like work together. And it is so many different areas, but it's almost problematic. And when we started, we're like, well, we've got this consumer side and we've got this corporate side, and we're working with businesses, but then the people working in businesses are talking about how it's affecting their marriage and their parenting. And then we're talking to people on the individual front, and they're seeing how it's showing up at work. And the thing is, like, this isn't a tool that affects like a particular area of life. I worked with the DISC for a while, and I like a lot of these other tools. I think they're accurate, but not always helpful. But there's something about this tool that we're trying to use, that it really is affecting every area of life, and knowing, well, then how do you shift? And I think people were a lot more compartmentalized before COVID. So you're talking about, you guys sort of launched post COVID, and like we saw a lot of our, like, that's really when we started doing a lot of our corporate work, is because these lines that have existed before are really blurred now. Like, I don't even know if any of us know what universe we're in or how the effects of this is going to work out. Like, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I think it's the blessing and the curse, if you want to say it like that, at the same time, that the Enneagram has. Because the reason I find it so much better and more helpful than any of these other systems, and I find, and I'm getting this feedback right now because, like Greg said, we're talking to a lot of people right now, also in the business space, because that's where we're expanding into. And you hear so many stories of these people having used these other systems, DISC and MBTI and stuff like that. And so often it's like, oh yeah, we did that once. Yeah, I guess it was nice. I don't remember what it's called.
Yeah,
it was nice.
Yeah.
And the big difference is that the Enneagram isn't really a system like that. It's not like this interesting gimmick or like this interesting, okay, I'm going to have some insights. And I think that's also the challenge, maybe why it hasn't been adapted in the business world as much yet, because it goes so much deeper than so many people in the business world usually wanted to go. Because basically every other system is talking about traits. It's talking about strengths. It's talking about certain compartmentalized parts of your personality. And like so often it's interesting. It's okay. But most of them have two drawbacks. First of all, they don't really tell you how that happened. Why did you turn into that person? And it also, most of them are too complex for you to understand others. And that's the big thing. With the MBTI, for example, you have 16 personalities. No one in the world will memorize all 16 personalities. You can't. It's too much. You will not be like, oh, yeah, you are an INFJ. And wait, what does that mean? Right. What was that again? That combination? And the Enneagram does this wonderful thing of where on the one hand, it's 9 types and you can remember 9 types. Everyone can. We all do. It goes pretty quickly if you dive a little bit into it. And it's very plastic. Like you explain the type, and what people do is like, oh yeah, no person, like I have an image in my mind. I have something visual that I can relate to. That's the one thing. And then on the other side, what the Enneagram does is it doesn't even care that much about your traits. It doesn't care. Like, so many traits are shared among types. You can't say, oh, and that's actually the thing you have to explain so many times. Like, just because someone does that doesn't mean they're this type. Just because someone dresses fancy, they're not a type 4. Just because someone is assertive, it means he's a type 8. It's about your inner belief system. It's the beliefs you took away in your childhood that shape the way you look at the world. And when that connects with people, and I think you've, in our conversations with you, you have shared so many stories. And basically anyone who has worked with the Enneagram has these stories of like, when it connects with someone, it goes so deep. And that's why it can't stay on just one level of life, in one area of life, because once you understand how you turned into the person you were, that makes you realize things about your marriage, your relationship, your family, your work life, your colleagues. It all, like, it connects all areas. And I think that's the big potential the Enneagram has, but especially in the business world, that's also the big challenge it needs to overcome. Because the way it has been sold in most areas and for most teachers and stuff like that, the Enneagram has a lot of, let's just be blunt here, esoteric language that comes with it. Yep. And the business world doesn't want to have to do with any of that. Like, you go to a Scrum team, you go to anything where's a programmer there that has a programmer in there, and they're like, where's the scientific basis for that? And you need to marry, and that's our mission. You need to marry the deep insight, which is like psychologically deep, helpful, even therapeutic insight, with a language that doesn't let the Enneagram appear as if it were some spiritual, esoteric thing. So you need to drill down to what is the psychological essence of this, and what can I back this up with psychological research, which parts of the Enneagram like give that to us. The things we found out is the 9 types do that. The basis of the 9 types and their like motivations and the instincts do that to a degree, but a lot of other areas, at some point you meet a lot of resistance if you're not able to explain it in a way in the business world where people are like, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
That's true. And the scale of business, because you're working either with blue collar organizations, and that's a different language even then. So
yeah,
I am so like, I'm getting out of my skin here as you're saying this. Like, I'm so tracking and like excited to hear how someone else articulate it that way as well. That's been our experience. I mean, it's all the time. It's like we're walking into organizations and they're not going to track with esoteric language, and they're going to want to know, does it work? It's a real pragmatism there in corporate America. So it's like,
and that's the crazy thing, because it does work. That's exactly I remember how you shared that. Like every time you get in there and you get to teach them and tell them and show them, they're like, oh my gosh, yes, this is so much like. This actually helps me. I can work with that. This isn't just like a team building exercise we do once and then everyone forgets about it. But like this helps me actually understand my coworkers, understand my bosses, understand myself, gives me a language to talk about that. And then, like you said, and then the other challenge is that people don't over-identify with it because it has that deep impact. And it kind of, I think it happens to everyone. It happened to me. It happened. I don't know if it happened to you. In the beginning, you're like, oh my gosh, everything. The Enneagram can explain everything. It's like, okay, no, can't. But it feels like that in the beginning.
No, it does. It was funny because as you're talking, I immediately thought of the former Navy SEAL that I did a coaching session with, forced into it by his wife. And so he's like, I don't.
That's dangerous.
And he's so funny because he's a type 7, but he's got, he's definitely a tough, just like really rough, kind of guy, but sweet, fun loving, so he's like, I don't get any of this stuff, Joel. I don't get any psychological stuff. Doesn't make any sense to me. So he was so, I found out afterwards, anxious about having this conversation with me. Mm-hmm. But making it simple and accessible, he was won over, like completely won over. Like, this I get, simple concept, simple language. Because for me, it's what you mentioned, the difference between, say, Myers-Briggs and the Enneagram. For me, I think I have this sort of saying that I play around with. If it's simple but complex, it's probably true. On the other side can be complicated, and trying to make it like, everybody needs to understand the complication of this, but it's not accessible to people. It's too difficult to get your hands around this thing. I believe in simple and complex, not complicated. So complex to me means it has depth to it. It has, you look at the first layer of water, it's water, right? But the deeper you get into it, even through a microscope, you start to discover there's endless possibilities, endless learning there. And I think that's true of anything that's actually true, is that it's got the simplicity and the accessibility to it, but you can keep going deep. And that's the model we've taken when we're dealing with business, is we don't need to get into the depths from go. We can approach it with that simplicity that's real and true and accessible, and it starts to have impact immediately.
Yeah.
And then people, if they want to take it deeper, they can, and we'll go there with them. So that's our approach.
Yeah. And I think the big challenge that all of these systems have is, what's easy is to give you insight about yourself. And all of them do that. Every single of these personality systems gives you insight about yourself. If it's Clifton Strengths, if it's DISC, if whatever, and then it's great. But the actually bigger challenge for the system to actually work in a group setting, and every work setting is a group setting. So for the business world, the challenge it needs to master is, does it help me understand other people as well? And that's the big thing that the Enneagram does. Because like with Clifton Strengths, I'm like, okay, I have my 34 strengths profile, but then it kind of requires me to memorize every strengths profile of every other person. And it's completely different. And it's what you're saying, Joel. It's complicated. And you won't do that. It solves the individualistic part of it. And our society loves everything that has to do with ourselves. But when it comes to work, you need to understand others. And so you need a system that can, where it takes you like one workshop is like, okay, if you are this type, I can work with that. I understand that. I can speak your language. I know kind of what I'm working with here. And I think that's the transformative power that the Enneagram has. It masters this challenge of not just giving you insight about yourself, but giving you insight about others.
Yeah. Well, there's also the complexity of that, which is how do you give something that has depth, but that doesn't put people in a reductionistic box that's just like that oversimplifies people either, because you see that happen. And I think that's an issue I totally figured out. We use a lot of language when we teach it about like your starting point. So, even if you have a hard time with 9 types, the fact that it's broken into 3 centers of intelligence really helps people go, okay, body types. All right, which were those again? Okay, so what's going on with those types, and having that as your starting point. So using a lot of starting point language, like, so this type starts with this, or how we use language around their attention goes towards this. What they're naturally tuned into first is this. It's not because we're trying to avoid the reductionistic, like you look like this, you act like this, like you were talking about that sort of typecasting kind of language, but it's not also like you need to understand. You said you wrote like 20,000 words on each type. Who is that type is going to remember like a third of that information, right?
It's split up into different places on the website, so it's not all in one place.
Got it. But how much information? Yes, you can keep going deeper, but we're using language because we're trying to give people things to hold on to understand about themselves and about others. And I think that's so much of this mission that we're all trying to figure out is how do we actually have depth and accessibility, right? So Joel was talking about like there's those tensions that exist, like that tension of depth and the tension of accessibility. So, you go to your website, personalitypath.com, correct?
Yes.
And it's just a beautiful, like here, and it's like here, there's only a couple things to pay attention to. There's a simplicity to it, but if they keep following along the journey, they're going to get deeper and deeper into like understanding themselves. And hopefully, I think we want people to be curious about others, but until people actually start to understand the depths of themselves, they don't. And I think there's an attitude that's really important that I want to add on to this, because when Joel's talking about people being resistant, when we actually sit with them and we talk to them about their story, and then we describe them back to themselves, and we say, you've probably had this kind of experience and you've probably run into this kind of interaction, but there's a lightness to it. There's a humor to it. There's a normalizing your experience to it. People are laughing at even the lowest parts of their story and things that in another context they've probably been ashamed of about themselves. And here there's like a lightness to it. And I think we even talk about on teams when 2 people are in a disagreement, we talk about, well, the types are doing this. It gives some objective distance. I think that's one of these challenges with this world is like, how do we get people to engage in the depth of it without being in the woo-woo or in the overly spiritual or the esoteric or the overly philosophical parts of it that has that practicality to it, right? And I think some of that's the starting point, but there's definitely something about the attitude that we communicate with and the way that we interact around it that makes a huge difference whether or not it's accessible to people.
Definitely. Yeah, and I wonder if the thing that kind of bridges that gap between depth and accessibility doesn't even have to do that much with type itself, but kind of the meta level of the Enneagram, which is awareness. And first self-awareness and then compassion and awareness for the other person. Because the way I talk about the Enneagram most of the time is what it shows you is your perspective, is your beliefs, is your, or like you said, like the things you pay attention to. And so many times that's, like you said, it's a starting point. And if you want to, and if you are able to foster that kind of awareness and compassion, then basically what the Enneagram is not, or what it could be, isn't typecasting at all, but instead it's a starting point for a conversation. It's okay, so you're a type 7, but instead of being like, oh yeah, type 7s do that and they do that and that's their typical behavior and that's how the way they think, it's like, oh wait, type 7, what was their basic motivation? What was like their worldview? It's this pleasure over facing the hard stuff. What does that look like for you? And then it's a starting point for a conversation. And then you get to know the person itself, because as we know, every single type is different. For me as a type 5, the way type 5, like my story is different from other type 5s, and it shows a little bit different. So if instead of like, oh yeah, he's a type 5, I know that means that, it's like, that's interesting. That's the world. That's the way type 5 see the world. What does that look like for you? Yeah. And if you get people to ask this kind of question, I think then you solve this. But at the same time, that's kind of the hardest thing, to get people to that point of awareness and compassion.
Oh, yeah. Well, part of it is they're mapping. A lot of people who have done other personality systems are mapping that personality system on top of the Enneagram, and it's like, well, that's the problem. It's not even the same thing.
Yeah.
Because it isn't a personality system to begin with. It became one. It's in its origin. It really wasn't. It's more wisdom, and depth and understanding. I love that you went to awareness, because that's where I was going to go. Is that I think that the Enneagram is not pointing to something that's so obscure and outside of reality that you have to go and find and learn. It's like, no, the point of it is it's actually revealing what's already present within you, and how other people are. And doing so then is why it's memorable. It's why it's sticky for people who do it. And those who don't want to go into places of awareness, well, that's the reason why it doesn't stick for them. Okay? It's like, I don't get this. I don't, right. Because you don't, because I know, because I was there for most of my life. I didn't want that. And why it struggled with even landing the 7 for me was I was in high resistance to anything that had to do with 7. Yeah. And so unpacking that was, oh, now I understand who I am. And that's why it sticks, is because, I feel that inside me right now. The reason why the type 6, sticks for me with my wife is because I experienced that. I experienced that kind of essence. And I think that that's more of the way you were describing it so well, is that's the difference, again, between that and the stereotyping. But yeah, it is a conversation. That's just which is why, for the thousands that we've typed and had conversations with, it has changed our perspective on all the types so many times, where there's nuances, where there's a broader range. It's like talking to a 5. Oh, so you must like processes. And the 5 looks at me and goes, oh, I hate processes. And I'm like, wait, what? And I learned that his understanding of process is like much more in the sort of practical, where it's like, he's more relational. And so he's thinking more about processes relationally, but that's not really where he's going to go in terms of thinking about process. Or, a type 1 who says, I'm not detail oriented. I don't really care about details as much. I mean, I want them to be done and done well, but I'm not going to be the one doing it. Right. So you start to hear all this stuff from people and types, and it gives you a broader range, so that then the questions of the way we're describing, either the way we're describing the type 1 or the questions that we're asking, it's more of that conversation. It's more about like, so the need to improve for you as a 1, how does that show up for you? And where does that show up? When you get feedback, what kind of feedback do you want? Well, you get some ones who are like, oh, I want them to tell me where I need to improve. Please don't give me the sort of fluff and like, I'm great and all this other stuff. So you start to pick that up. And then another one is like, oh, I love positive affirmation.
Yeah.
please give me positive affirmation. I love it. Right. So it's so funny how you just get this wide range. Yeah. And it just makes you ask better questions. And I think you're describing, it's why to me, once people get that, and why organizations, they get it, they fall in love with it, and they replace the other systems with it. And I tell them, like, you don't need to toss the other systems out. They just will fit better underneath the larger framework of the Enneagram. So now it makes sense of these other smaller frameworks that can be utilized.
So what would interest me so much then is, in your experience, have you found anything, that approaches consistency about what gets people to actually switch, to actually make that decision to see it? Like if you talk, because what you were saying is like, the toughest part is to get organizations to see it. And when they see it, they realize, they switch and they realize how great it is, and then they switch. So in your experiences in talking with all of these people, pitching the Enneagram, have you made any where it's like, apparently if you put it like this, they get it? Or is it just different for every single person?
Well, yeah, because it's your biggest connection to the usefulness of anything is how it aligns to your own personal story.
Yeah.
So when someone gets it and they're really in, is because they go, I see my story now more clearly. I see the decisions I've made throughout my life more clearly because I see, yep, right there. Joel talked about coming to the Enneagram because of burnout. When I came to the Enneagram, I looked at my own story and my own history radically differently and went, so that's why those parts of my life blew up. So, and I think when we're talking to a company, one of the things we've done a lot lately is just being like, hey, the team leader or the decision maker, whatever, have them do a typing interview with us. Let us walk them through the process of answering questions. And they're going, I've never thought about that question. Or, man, I have a lot to say about that. Or, you just told me what it's like inside my brain. What's going on here? That personal experience is always going to be the thing. So, I love doing podcasts. I love doing public facing stuff. It's great, but it will never have the impact as far as something that is spreadable that they will when people have like this individual experience with it. If that many people have taken the test on your website, they've told their friends, go take it here and look at what I saw about myself. I know that's what's happened with us. No one would know about us if people weren't taking this podcast of these panels where we set it up just like what Joel was describing. Hey, this is what's in the literature. What's this like for you? And then, leaving it really open. And then they're going like, you got to hear this. Hey, my dear beloved significant other partner, listen to this and you'll understand me better. That's the stuff that I think has the most potential to spread and that we've seen.
In terms of getting it into businesses, I think the approach will have to shift, and we're starting to shift as well, because I don't think you can sell the Enneagram.
Right.
And I think a lot of organizations or coaches have, they'll use, say, Myers-Briggs or DISC or some other personality system, but they're not primarily selling that anymore. It used to be that's the thing, and some organizations wanted to know, hey, what's the personality tool you're using? A lot of organizations, I'm not sure that they're really as interested in that. It is important to them, but it's not maybe front and center. So I think what we're doing is instead we're starting to think about offering workshops that are titled, with the issues that the organizations are dealing with. So, for example, trust, right, or conflict, or communication, effective communication. So we're starting to do that, and that I think is something that organizations need. And if they bring us in, then we're looking at using this tool. And once they've tasted of it, usually it's whoever is the person that's interfacing with us. We'll talk about it with them, start with a typing interview with them, and they see it and they go, oh my gosh, that happened just this week. So the organization kind of like, okay, I'll check these guys out. They bring me in and they're saying, oh my gosh, after one session, it's like, can we do like a team thing with several others? And I said, absolutely we can, because once they see it, then it makes sense of the tool itself. But yeah, I think in approaching it, we're going to have to go in that direction that I mentioned.
Yeah. What about you guys? What's next, do you think, for Personality Path?
For us, it's actually helping people on that path. And I think what we're doing already good is, helping people getting the starting point with the Enneagram, like getting like a profound understanding of themselves, but also of the people around them in their lives, and giving them some first, ideas on how to use the Enneagram in certain settings. But what we see is that, people really want to connect and with others, really want to, I think, Joel, you described it quite well, like people go crazy once you discover it, you just try to consume any material on the Enneagram that is out there. But I think helping people in certain settings, so if that means, helping like you guys, like what you guys are doing, helping teams understanding each other better and facilitating that conversation around that, and enabling actually also a lot more people to do things like that, because I think there's actually also a big focus of Enneagram coaches on, you know, using it in therapeutic settings and so on. But I don't see that many Enneagram coaches spreading the word in the business setting. So I think it's also about enabling people to bring the Enneagram in those settings, and then you know, building content, but also building conversations around relationships matters. I mean, that's, I think, something where a lot of people are struggling. I mean, Joel, you were mentioning it. I, for myself, also experienced it, that when I got to know the Enneagram, you know, so many areas of my life were affected. I mean, it just spills over from, you start at one point, but it spills over in all the areas of your life, and you just show up as a different person, I think, once you start to work with it. And I think that's our dream of really helping people on this transformative path. And that's actually the world that we're dreaming of, you know, like of really having just countless people that have found inner peace with themselves, and then also spread this peace in their relationships, show up at work in just in a different way than they used to. And I think this will bring really lasting change also to the whole world as a bigger perspective. And so that's some of the things that we're thinking about. I mean, definitely we're working on a lot of also content that you will hear about. So if you just follow us on personalitypath.com and sign up to our email list, or follow us on social media and so on, you will definitely get the word of what's to come.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to ask, actually. So if you go to personalitypath.com, what are you going to be finding? What should people be looking for?
Yeah.
What things can they expect to gain from you?
The way we set it up is, it's, I think, a really great resource to get started with the Enneagram. So if you have friends around you and you want to help them, you know, find a good way into the Enneagram, I think that's a good way to find your type, but also get a better understanding about all the other types. And then obviously, like, starting to work with the Enneagram. What we also see a lot is, you know, really finding your type is not so easy for a lot of people, because it takes some, you know, also personal reflection, and so there's a lot of people also that are, you know, struggling to or you know, they have like two types that they're not sure if it's one more or the other. So with also great resources around that, of, you know, misidentifications and so on. So this is definitely a helpful resource if you have friends that are just getting started with the Enneagram.
That's great.
I mean, the first thing obviously is the test. That's like the big sign outside the door that we invite people in with, to take the test first, and then take it from there. If it's the type descriptions, if it's their wings, like, there's everything on the website. Obviously, the bulk of the stuff is that typing guide that people can get after they take their test, where the majority of the 20,000 words is allocated. Yeah, and where we basically, that's the biggest effort of us to create this resource where people not only get this introduction into their type in a way that makes sense to them and that they can relate with, but also something that is super practical and gives them basically like this 4-step action plan of like, how can I integrate this into my daily life? What can I try out that actually helps me with my type? What kind of questions can I ask myself? So it doesn't just stop at like, okay, and here is the whole theory, here are the wings, here are the arrows, here's this, but it's like, all right, how can you go from there?
And to add to that, I think, you know, building digital platforms, I mean, that's great. And it's a starting point for a lot of people. But I think on our journey, what we realized is that, at least that's how it was for me, having conversations in real life with other people, and having maybe someone who is an experienced Enneagram coach and helps you, you know, like dig deeper, because sometimes you just need this outside help. It will only take you to a certain level. I think just reading a book or reading our profiles and the 20,000 words that Christian wrote. So definitely something that we're thinking about is how to bridge the gap between having this digital world but also bringing it to the real world. And I think for all the Enneagram coaches out there listening, I think there will be definitely lots of cooperations that we try to establish, so that also the existing Enneagram community out there, we try to connect people with the right coach that will help them. And I think that's also a decisive point, that you find the right coach for you to take you on that journey and that path, because it's always a matter of personal fit if it clicks. And that's something we'll try to figure out.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you both being here and sharing all this and talking about this. And it's great because you guys have been behind the scenes of this website that so many people visit, and none of them have any idea who you are. And so I think it's awesome that you're sharing a bit more about your story.
There is a picture on the bottom of the homepage where they can see our faces, and on the About Us page. But
right.
but we're not the brand.
Right.
Greg and I are not the brand.
Right. But there's definitely something about hearing from you that be really great for so many of the people who have benefited from your content, to kind of hear a bit more about who you are, where you came from, what you care about, your why. Because your why is always going to be the thing that is most powerful and most sustainable over the long haul. So I appreciate you sharing your why here. And
we appreciate you giving us the chance to talk about it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, it's awesome. So hopefully a lot of your people who have taken your tests also listen to this at some point and hear a bit more about you. So this is great. Thank you so much, guys.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for listening. You can find out more about us at theartofgrowth.org or follow us on Instagram at just Art of Growth. That is also the best place to sign up for our newsletter to know what is going on around here, including our upcoming certification course. If you want to follow what Personality Path is doing, you can go to personalitypath.com and sign up for their newsletter. There's good stuff all around, and we want to set you up for success in 2024 because it is almost the end of the year, my friends. So may you reflect on the journey of this year with an honest, generous, and gracious eye to see your own story and remember that all of it belongs. May you value the ups and downs you have experienced, as all of these shape your becoming, and all of it is part of your sacred story. And may the view of that story inform how you want to approach the year in front of you. Grace and growth, my friends.